Hi, everyone. I'm John Tonai. Welcome back to the Tadaima Fine Art Friday Artist Talk. This week, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you the Round Rock Collective. One fun part of my position here at Tadaima is discovering artists whose work is new to me. I love it when I find artists on Instagram, Facebook, or when using internet searches, or, as in the case here, when I get a referral. When I asked people if they knew any contemporary artists working with the Japanese American experience as subject matter, Ron Burscher here suggested I look up the Round Rock Collective. While watching their video, Keeping, I was entranced by the stories of the incarcerees and their connection to the little ceramic vessels they were making as they recalled their lives in the camps and at the Seabrook farms. In 2018, the matrilineal Ishimaru cousins formed the Round Rock Collective. Their work integrates each of their individual practices: Miki Palchick as a ceramic artist, Sophie Sarkar as a photographer and painter, and Andrienne Palchick as a printmaker and documentary artist. Together, they explore themes based in nature, growing, homemaking, and the rituals that accompany them, celebrating the grounding in times of dislocation. They belong to the Three Rivers, Lake Michigan, New Jersey, California, the Midwest, and Asia, and are currently finding home in Philadelphia. Ishimaru means round rock. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Miki Palchick, Sophie Sarkar, and Andrienne Palchick, the Round Rock Collective.
Hello, everyone. We are Sophie, Miki, and Andra, three cousins and sisters who together make up the Round Rock Collective, which we formed back in 2018. And we'll start by introducing ourselves individually, and then I'll speak a little bit more about us as a collective. So to start, my name is Sophie Sarkar. I'm a painter and photographer and community organizer based on the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape in Philadelphia. And both my art and organizing work exists at the intersection of racial and environmental justice. And in both, I work in community with other Black, Indigenous, and people of color to heal and deepen our relationships with each other, with our ancestors, and with the earth. And with that, I'll pass it on to Andra.
Thanks, Soph. Hi, everybody. I'm Andra. I work mostly in print and publications and have a particular interest in archives. And for me, that work means the maintaining and making accessible of different forms of documentation, some of which we'll be sharing with you today, such as the interview and other modes of storytelling. Go for it, Miki.
Thanks, Andra. Hello, my name is Miki Palchick. I am a potter and farm and food educator based in Philadelphia also on the Lenape land. I am currently occupying Sioux land in North Carolina, where I am learning to use local clays and glaze materials and to wood fire.
Great. So together we are the Round Rock Collective, and our collective's name comes from our Japanese family name Ishimaru, which means round rock, and it's a very fitting name because in so many ways I consider Miki and Andra to be my round rocks, the people who are always there for me no matter what. As a collective, we combined our individual practices as artists to make work about nature and home and family and the rituals that surround these subjects, so that we can really remember and celebrate our grounding in these times of dislocation. And additionally, as creative activists, we also contextualize our work within past and present political struggle and movements for liberation. We're really excited today to present our video Keeping with all of you, which is a project we created based on interviews with Japanese American former residents and employees of Seabrook Farms. And the video weaves together footage from those interviews along with archival documentation to really explore industrial agriculture as a military project and the role it has and continues to play in US imperialism. And the video also importantly honors the labor and resilience of farm workers who persevere in their traditional growing practices and other keepings, even in their displacement. We believe that sharing this story of Seabrook Farms is really important as it relates to the ongoing relationship between anti-immigration policies and the simultaneous exploitation of migrant labor in the US. And it's also personally meaningful to us as descendants of migrant farmers in Southern California who were incarcerated in Manzanar and Tule Lake camps during World War II, and who have felt the lasting effects of dislocation and separation ourselves. Finally, it's important because the story of Seabrook also captures a lesser known experience of Japanese American relocation to the East Coast. So the video is about 20 minutes, and afterwards we will be discussing more about the project's origins, our creative process, and what we learned through making this project together. And we'll also be taking questions from the audience. So we hope you enjoy it, and we look forward to engaging more with you all after. Thank you.
First day, I remember we arrived in near Warner Street train station, and there were a lot of veterans that were passing through there at that time. But when we got to Seabrook, using us by a school bus, and I remember there was a candy machine. You put coins in, and you get candy out of the candy machine. And I guess my parents were in that community hall registering our family all together.
My parents, both of them, were incarcerated in Poston, Arizona. And after the war, they, like many others, migrated here to Seabrook and to work for Charles F. Seabrook, because he was the businessman and farmer who allowed the Japanese Americans and other ethnic groups to come work on his farms. And so there's the reason why 3,500 Japanese Americans came to Seabrook to start a new life after the camps.
Before coming to Seabrook, we were in Salinas, California. We were strawberry farmers. We worked for a gentleman who had a strawberry farm. So we went and picked strawberries. But I was little then, so I wasn't involved, but my brothers and sisters were strawberry pickers. So we lived on a farm most of our lives.
This is before the war, yeah. But my father had a 50-acre farm in downtown Salinas. If you look at the map of Salinas, you'll see a bare spot right in the middle of the city. A bare spot, maybe 200 acres. And we had 50 of those acres. But we grew sugar beets, and he made a mint making sugar beets because he was able to buy a 1940 Buick, Super Buick.
My grandfather was a kind of an itinerant farmer. I mean, the whole family, I think, was involved in that enterprise. He had been active with some Japanese farmers group in California.
Well, let me see. My father was a buyer for the Salinas lettuce packing company, but everybody in Japanese in Salinas was associated with farms.
So as a segue, I do believe what was happening towards the end of the war is that Mr. Seabrook's son, Jack Seabrook, and his father were talking to see if they could approach the U.S. government because they needed laborers. And so they got permission from, at that time, the War Department to use the laborers from the camps. And so the Japanese Americans that were in camp were approached, and I guess they were negotiators or go-betweens, were able to go to these various camps and put the proposal together to say that there's a farmer in Seabrook who is willing to pay for your transportation out of camp and provide you lodging, quote unquote lodging, and a work, and really start a new life. Because if they were to go back to their original homes in Southern California or Salinas or wherever they were, there would still be a lot of racism, and they still face hardships because they would have nothing to go back to. So with this opportunity that Mr. Seabrook had, it's a brand new life. It's like, here's a new lease. You're going to get a job. You're going to get paid. We'll provide you a place to live and a place for your children to grow and have an education. So I think that was a very attractive package to a lot of the Japanese Americans who had nothing.
Well, I think there was some kind of pipeline of information, which I think for a period, it might have been the most densely populated community of Japanese Americans anywhere in the country, given what had happened of the evacuation and the internment. And then I think there was a reluctance for many to go back to the West Coast, particularly California.
The option came up when my father, when we were, before Gila, we were in Jerome, Arkansas, in the other camp. And my father was selected to be on a committee of 3 to go to Seabrook to look over the prospects of living and working in Seabrook, because there were jobs and there was going to be housing by the Federal Housing Authority. And so this committee, and my father was among them, went to Seabrook to look it over. So they wrote up a report which went to a lot of the other camps for people who were homeless as well, because we had no homes to go back to. And so there were a lot of people who decided to go to Seabrook because there was no other option.
Well, my father was, because he was allowed to leave Poston almost anytime he wanted to, after the 2 questions and the no, so he became a yes. And he was allowed to work in Idaho, potato fields. And after that, he just traveled across looking for work. He traveled across, ended up in Seabrook, and found that he could make the government pay for the travel from Poston to Seabrook. So the government paid for our one-way travel by train.
Well, you know, when you live in a small community, news travels fast. So everyone was all abuzz about, oh, we have an opportunity in Seabrook. And so my father said, well, we can't go back to California. And where else will we go? And at least we're assured of housing and meals for 1 year. Because, you know, we had no means of making money in camp. So he said, that's a good deal. So we, along with all the other families, decided that's the place to go.
And there is a connection between many of the Japanese American families from Salinas. There's a Salinas, Poston, Seabrook connection. And so I'm trying to dig into that a little deeper, because there are so many families that kind of made that journey from Salinas to Poston, that particular camp, to Seabrook.
2 summers I worked, summer jobs. I worked at the plant. The first year, there wasn't much work for us, so we would have to walk to the plant and then walk home again, because they said there was no work. But my senior year, there was a lot of work, and we were able to work shifts, so worked the day shift and the night shift. And that year, that summer, all we did was work and eat and sleep. We didn't have time for anything else, because working long hours.
Well, my father was a mechanic in the factory, and my mother was on the packing line. So she would pack like dozens of other women in Seabrook Farms. There'd be little wax packages. You put the fruits or vegetables, and they go down the line and get sealed and wrapped and shipped to the market. It was hard work. I mean, you would be standing, for probably about 10 hours or more.
They used to have sorting tables where they used to have blueberries. I remember blueberries. And the blueberries would come rolling down on the rolling tables. And you have to pick out twigs and bugs and things that were, integrated into the blueberries. And same with beans, if there were unnecessary items in there, you had to pluck them out. And then from there, I graduated to the line where you had to weigh the boxes that the vegetables came in to make sure that they were up to par and all that. And I did that through until I graduated high school. And then when I was in college, I became a timekeeper.
Yeah, I worked there in the factory, yeah. But I prefer working out in the farm and in the fields. I love working out in the field. We either picked peas, lima beans, or green beans. But first we went out, and I had to pick the green beans and fill a 5/8 basket, and then you get it weighed 25 pounds, and you get a punch card that you pick that basket. And I said, gee, I'd rather weigh the beans than pick the beans. So that's what I did for 4 summers from 8th grade to senior high.
Working in the food plant, in the frozen food plant, I was always among the food, whether I was doing the canning of the beets or corn husking and getting dust all over, or packing it up, or keeping time of the people who were working. It was just all encompassing food all the time.
Yeah, well, right in each block had its own area where you could grow things.
Yeah.
And it's just a plot of ground, and you just plant various kinds of vegetables or flowers or whatever you want, watermelons. And
the watermelons were great.
yeah, the posted watermelons and honeydew and
It's like when we have it here, no taste, big difference.
In Seabrook, families who wanted could have a family little plot and grow their own vegetables if they wanted. My father wanted to grow cucumbers and lettuce and some vegetables, and he loved to make pickles. It's kimono, And so that's what he did. He had a little family plot, and he would grow cucumbers and make cucumber pickles and little things like that. But it wasn't a big garden. It was just a small garden. But he loved it. I mean, he liked to do that. He liked to see things grow.
Here in Seabrook, down on the other side of Hoover Village, there was a whole, I don't know how many acres of land that Seabrook let us use to grow any kind of vegetables you wanted.
My mom used to grow satoimo.
Oh, yeah.
It's Japanese potatoes.
But when we came here, my brother always had a garden and grew all the vegetables, a lot of different Japanese vegetables, and he would give them to all the neighbors. He had gobo, and then and nasubi, eggplants, Japanese eggplants, and he had strawberries, a little patch of strawberries, and what else? Cucumbers, the Japanese cucumbers, the little Kirby cucumbers. Yeah, I used to grow them, and then my mother had a garden. She made shiitake mushrooms. No, it wasn't a garden, but she had these logs where you put these plugs in, and the shiitake mushrooms growing out. Oh my God, that was really something. Why did they call it a victory garden?
I don't know.
That was because of the during the war.
Yeah,
you grew your own vegetable. But I guess we just call it a victory garden. One thing interesting was that apparently, I don't know if it was in the contract, but if you lived in Seabrook and lived in a Seabrook housing, that you couldn't work outside of Seabrook. they would ask you to leave if somebody in your family was working for somebody other than Seabrook. I didn't know about that until much, much later. And I was really surprised because I figured you work for Seabrook, or if you could find a better job, you work somewhere else. But nope.
That's what happened to our family. There were 7 of us. They all worked at Seabrook, except I have another sister that just passed away who worked for a lawyer and was a secretary in the lawyer's office. And because she worked in the lawyer's office and didn't work in Seabrook, we were asked to leave. And we didn't move to Millville, the next town over. We bought a farm in Millville, and we grew okra, onions, and my brother would take the vegetables and take it to Philly on a pickup truck and go to the produce market. Yeah, we did that for several years.
My father, he retired at the age of 72, at which time he bought a 10-acre farm.
At age 70.
At 72.
At 72.
Yeah.
Wow.
He grew tomatoes, strawberries, and then he put in a irrigation system. So there was a pickle factory nearby, and pickles require a lot of water. So he grew gherkins. So they asked him if he would grow, and he said, "Fine, because you have irrigation." And he used to carry the pipes. I knew he grew tomatoes, green peppers, of course, cucumbers, and then strawberries.
That wonder was strawberries.
Yeah. So he loved it. So he ran it until that summer when he was 84, he paid off his mortgage, and that winter he passed away. Yeah, it was 5 days before his 85th birthday, but he realized his dream. He always wanted to have, his own farm, and he kept it young. My name is Eiko Hada Ikeda.
And I'm Albert Bunji Ikeda. My name was given to me by my grandfather. And Bunji is supposed to mean civil peace.
My name is Miko Horikawa. Well, my maiden name is Sasaki. Yes, I first moved to Seabrook, New Jersey in May of 1945. And that was soon after we left the camp. We were in the camp called Gila, Gila, Arizona.
Okay, I'm Babe Kato. I come to Seabrook back in 1946, and I've been here for the rest of my life.
My name is Alice Kazaoka, and we came in, I think, September of 1945. And I've lived most of my life here, except I went away for school, and then because of my husband's job, we've done a lot of moving around. But we wanted to retire here, so we came back in 2003.
My name is Masaru Kazaoka, and I moved here same time Babe and her family moved. We came from Poston.
Okay, my full name is Masaru Edwin Nakawadase, and some people know me as Mas, and others know me as Ed. And that's another story. Well, I was born in an internment camp in Poston in 1943. My family moved to Seabrook after living in Wilson, Arkansas for a couple of years. So we settled in Seabrook around either late 1946 or around early 1947.
So my name is Michael Asada, and I was born and raised in Seabrook. All I remember as a child was growing up in a community where my parents and the generation were supporting the farm industry with Mr. Seabrook.
Wonderful. So thank you, everyone.
Also, we're still waiting to get our artists back right now. So we're going to have them talk about, give you a little background story behind their project as soon as we get them up. And then afterwards, I'll have a little discussion with them, and then there'll be a question and answer period. So I do know that one of the things that's interesting right now, I was talking to Miki earlier, is there is a really bad storm in New Jersey where she's staying. So hopefully that's not causing the problem. I can give a little bit of an impression of why they were important to me. Was that my mom's family.
Oh no. I think we lost John. I hope everyone can hear us. I definitely want to check back in when we come back together for the Q&A to hear the rest of that thought, John. But do want to say thank you to everyone who's joining tonight for witnessing our Keeping project. And also thank you to John and Royce and Kimiko for facilitating this space for us. And yeah, let's get started. We're gonna give you some background on the project. If you can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, as Sophie introduced us earlier, we are the Round Rock Collective. Very grateful to be here tonight. You can go to the next slide. First, we want to give you some context around how we came to this work. And a lot of that, which has to do with our family's own history and their relationship to the land, as well as their forced removal and dislocation from it. So in doing so, we want to acknowledge that also throughout this history, Japanese Americans' cultivation of the land through their farming work and growing practices, as well as their displacement from it, has taken place on stolen indigenous ancestral lands. So throughout this conversation, we will point to the lands that our family occupied at various sites, both in their freedom and in their incarceration. The three of us are connected through our mother's family, and today we'll be speaking to the family history of the Ishimarus, our Round Rock's namesake, which is our matrilineal grandmother's family. Before the Ishimarus came to the United States, they lived in Fukuoka in Japan, where they worked as rice farmers. Some of the first members of our family that immigrated to California were our great-grandfather Yutaka and his brothers Hakaru and Jim. They found work as migrant laborers picking lemons on a citrus farm in Santa Paula, California, which is on occupied Chumash land. It's here where they replaced Chinese immigrants whose labor was suddenly in shortage due to the Chinese Exclusion Act. The farm is still in operation and has grown considerably. The company's name is Limonera, and it distributes its products nationally. So if you can see on the slide to the left, there's a photo of 2 boxes with the Limonera insignia on it. I took this photo at the Greek restaurant where I worked in Philadelphia up until last year, where these lemons were shipped to. Growing up, we came to know this site as our family commonly referred to it, which is Camp Lemonnier. Eventually, more families left Fukuoka and came to the States, family members left Fukuoka and came to the States. Our great-grandfather and his brothers settled in West Los Angeles, which is occupied Keach land, where they started a landscaping business and also started their own families. So in the middle photo there, you can see the house on Corinth Avenue in West LA. It's in the Sawtell neighborhood, where our grandmother Satako Ishimaru and her siblings grew up. This is a more recent photo. You can see there's been a lot of development since when they lived there. There's a lot of big condos and larger complexes that have been built since, but the house is amazingly still standing. And it's one of the only single-family structures that's still standing on the street. After Executive Order 9066, our family, like many Japanese Americans on the West Coast, were forcefully removed from their home, from this home that you see here, and sent to incarceration camps located further into the interior of the country. Our family was incarcerated at Manzanar War Relocation Center, which is in the desert of southeastern California and is on occupied Paiute land. It was called Manzanar after the manzana, or the apples that grew there before it was a prison. Our grandmother Satako's immediate family was then later further dispersed to the higher security camp, Tule Lake Segregation Center, which is at the border of Northern California and southeastern Oregon, and was on occupied Modoc land, and also to the Santa Fe Detention Center, which was a Department of Justice site in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on occupied Pueblos and Jicarilla Apache lands. The photo that's toward the top on the right there is if you were in Tule Lake, if you were in the camp, looking across what is now a road, this is the view that you would see. And this site is now contested land between federal lands maintained by the National Park Service and a private airport. So for the sake of time, we don't want to talk too much on the specific histories of these sites, so there's plenty to say. But we do want to note that even in incarceration, many Nikkei kept victory gardens, as they called them. So small like fruit and vegetable gardens that they kept to sustain themselves and their families, and that they did this even in the desert, even in the poor growing conditions of the camps. And we're going to show you some more documentation of that later in the presentation. So there's these examples of resilience here, and that I also want to mention that many incarcerees were contracted by the government as laborers while in the camps to do farming work in the surrounding area. One of the big projects that folks were contracted for was implementing irrigation systems that developed the arid regions around the camps into land that could be better used for agricultural development. Lastly, I want to leave with the anecdote that leads into how we came to our work with keeping. At the end of the war, our grandmother's immediate family decided to leave for Japan upon being released from Tule Lake in Santa Fe. This was for a variety of reasons, but there was concern about citizenship and statelessness among her siblings. And of course, they were also facing the same fear and struggles that many Nikkei faced in returning to where they lived prior to the war, but without a home or anything to really return to. So that in this otherwise stressful, confusing, and surely painful process of leaving for Fukuoka, our grandmother would fondly tell this story of her own practice of keeping. And there are varying accounts of who actually carried them, but she would tell us that she basically smuggled California Klondike watermelon seeds with her and brought them from the States to Japan. So traditionally in Japan, watermelons are a much smaller variety. So when they landed back in Fukuoka and eventually started a garden with the seeds, these big Klondike watermelons were the envy of all of their neighbors. So much so that our Uncle Roy and great-grandfather Yutaka used to take turns guarding them at night so that no one would be tempted to steal them. And this is where Satako lived and grew with her family until she met our grandfather Arnold and moved back to the States while her parents and siblings stayed in Fukuoka.
Thank you, Andra. Next slide, thank you. So I just want to give you a background on how we first learned about Seabrook. We heard about it from our friend who plays in the Taiko drum group that meets at the Seabrook Buddhist Temple.
She had been telling me about the Taiko group and her temple and the temple for years, and another friend and I finally made it out there for their performance at the temple's New Year celebration. It was really amazing because Seabrook is a tiny town in rural New Jersey, and I had no idea that there was a Japanese American community there. We walked into the temple basement full of interracial Japanese American families like ours, sat down at the long community tables, and received our enormous pre-ordered bento boxes. I immediately felt this overwhelming sense of belonging that I had not felt since moving to Philadelphia years before, and was very curious about the history of Seabrook, the temple, and the community there, and excited to tell Andra and Sophie about it. So we went back out that summer for the Obon Festival and were able to visit the Seabrook Educational and Cultural Center and learn more about Seabrook Farms, and eventually got connected to folks who grew up there. Next slide, please. A lot of things came together at once for this project. We wrote a letter to our grandmother's house in West LA asking for permission to visit. There was also a call for a show on Asian Americans in agriculture at Som Arts Cultural Center in San Francisco. And at the same time, I had finished up a grant-funded school garden consulting position and was wanting to take some time to focus on pottery. Also, it was a year into Trump's occupation of the White House, and we, like many of you, I think, were feeling the need to tell our family's story and stand in solidarity with immigrant and refugee communities targeted by state-sanctioned xenophobia. So we proposed a project on Seabrook for the show in San Francisco, embarked on a self-guided pilgrimage to Tule Lake, Manzanar, and our grandmother's house in West LA. And then I continued on to the Monera Farms in California, Poston Moore Relocation Center in Arizona on the occupied land of the Colorado River Tribes, the Santa Fe Department of Justice site, and the Roar War Relocation Center in Arkansas on occupied Quapaw, Oceti, Chacoan, and Osage lands. I collected soil at each site, not sure what I was going to do with it yet, but knowing that I wanted to make something to honor these places and the history of the people who have lived there.
Next slide. So we really wanted this project to be based on the lived experiences and stories of Japanese Americans who lived and worked at Seabrook. So in order to find such an interview, we called upon our existing relationships with JA leaders in Philadelphia, such as Rob Busher and Alex Webb, to connect us with folks they knew who had grown up in Seabrook. And we also connected with some of the interviewees through local JACL events and potlucks in Philadelphia and New Jersey. And over the course of a couple of months, we interviewed 8 people, all of whom you can see on this slide. So from left to right, the folks that we interviewed included Albert Bunji Ikeda, Eiko Ikeda, Miko Horikawa, Masaru or Mas Edmund Nakawatase, which is the photo on the top right. And then from left to right on the bottom photo is Babe Kato, Alice Kazaoka, Masaru Kazaoka, and Michael Asada. And this was definitely one of my favorite parts of the project, was just getting to interview and connect with these 8 Japanese American elders. As Miki mentioned earlier, sometimes it can feel really hard in Philly to feel seen or a sense of belonging as a Japanese American, because our community is so small compared to Japanese American communities in cities on the West Coast and even in cities in the Midwest like Chicago. So it was just a really powerful experience to really interrupt that feeling and that narrative in my own mind that Japanese Americans don't exist in Philly, and to get to do that through this project and to learn more about the local Japanese American history, and yeah, just to feel more connected with local Japanese American community where we live.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the time between our pilgrimage and starting the interview process, we decided to create a map representing the World War II incarceration sites. So that's the installation you saw us assembling in the video. We made small pinch pots representing each of the assembly centers, incarceration centers, and Department of Justice centers built during World War II with the soil we collected, and filled them with 120,000 seeds representing the number of Nikkei people incarcerated during the war. The seeds we chose were from crop varieties that the interviewees and their families grew before the war, in camp, and at Seabrook, and later as adults. And the 8 people we interviewed each made a pinch pot with soil from the prisons they were held in as children, and these were included in the installation also.
Next slide, please. So none of us are filmmakers, but we knew we wanted to have some sort of visual projection to go along with the audio of the recorded stories that Andra so beautifully edited. And both Andra and I really love photographs. So at some point we decided to do some archival research to see what images existed of Japanese Americans living and working at Seabrook Farms after the war. And we also wanted to find documentation of growing and acts of resilience of Japanese Americans while they were incarcerated in the desert prison camps during World War II. So we searched through literally thousands of photos in the Densho Project, the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and a collection that was really important for this project from the Seabrook Educational and Cultural Center that exists on the Rutgers University Library's Community Repository. And in addition to looking through the public archives, we also asked interviewees to share with us any photos that they had in their personal archives. So on this slide on the left, the 2 left photos are images of victory gardens, which Andra mentioned before, but these were gardens, fruit and vegetable gardens that families planted during World War II. And these gardens were really encouraged by the US government to reduce pressure on the public food supply. And so those are 2 really beautiful images. The top one is from a victory garden in Manzanar, and the bottom one is from a victory garden at Heart Mountain. And then the 2 center photos are documentation. They show different roles that folks played at Seabrook Farms. So in the top photo, you see 2 women sorting through spinach, and the sorting lines were something that many folks talked about on the interviews. And then the bottom photo is a frozen foods truck, which we still see today if you go to Seabrook. There are many of those big trucks. And then on the right, on the top right, we were really surprised and to find that we actually found some family photos from folks that we interviewed while we were doing our research in the public archives. So that photo is of the Taniguchi family in Salinas, actually in 1935, before the war. And if you can see, there's a little one that's being held by the mother, and that is Babe Kato, who's one of the people that we interviewed. And additionally, the photo on the bottom right is from a personal archive. It's of Bunji's mom, who worked in the quality control lab at Seabrook Farms.
Oh, you can actually stay back for a minute on that slide. Yeah. Oops. Okay. So in moving through these processes of making this project and meeting with interviewees, we wanted to evaluate what we take away and where we go from here, what we learned. And we certainly heard varied perspectives from the folks who we interviewed, though there were common narratives that also emerged. One of which was, and I want to note here that most everyone who we interviewed were Nisei. So they were the first generation of Japanese Americans born here in the States of their families, and who remembered arriving at Seabrook in the late 1940s as children. So this means that both their memory of the camps were from being young children, and their memory of Seabrook was from growing up there. So Seabrook was the place where their parents worked in the plant or on the farm. And it was also the place when they got older, when they were in high school, where they would also work during the summers. And many described it as a decent childhood where their needs were met, and also acknowledging that this experience was relative to their family's experiences in the incarceration camps. Another common narrative we heard across interviews was the trajectory of relocation. And you heard Michael Asada outline this a bit in the film. But many Japanese Americans at Seabrook were formerly incarcerated at Poston. And because where you were incarcerated was often based on where you were located regionally at the time of Executive Order 9066, this meant many Nikkei and Poston had formerly lived and worked in Salinas, California. The Salinas Valley was and still is a region heavily rooted in agriculture, meaning that most Japanese Americans who lived there before being evacuated worked as farmers. And we heard this in our interviews. We hear Babe Kato, and we hear Masaru Kazuoka and Bunji Ikeda. We hear them all talk about their families growing strawberries and lettuce and beets in the Salinas Valley before incarceration, and which are still staple crops of the region's industry. So there's definitely a shared history here of many people at Seabrook displaced first from Salinas into Poston and then relocated from Poston to Seabrook. And it really makes sense. It makes sense that the War Relocation Authority's recruitment efforts for Seabrook would be focused at sites where there was already a large population inclined toward farming work. And want to note also that Poston was one of the places where the huge undertaking of implementing irrigation systems, that was one of the central places where that project took place. And those systems are still used to provide water to that region, which now has a lot of industrial agriculture. So these experiences, such as this, point to the economic motives and motives for agricultural development that were also central to the state's interest in Japanese American incarceration. When we do hear about these histories, which for the three of us at least, it's our experience that we hear about it much less on the East Coast, but that when we do, Japanese American incarceration is talked about as a consequence of wartime hysteria. It's talked about as a consequence of xenophobia, which it certainly was. But it's also important to acknowledge the role that the state's economic interests played. The labor, skill, and experience of Nikkei farmers was very valuable. The once marginal lands that they made viable for farming were valuable. And so the seizure of Japanese managed, if not owned land on the West Coast was very valuable to the state.
Okay, now we're ready for that last slide. So as I worked my way across the country visiting the World War II prisons, many of the overlapping histories of land theft, displacement, and forced and exploited labor between immigrant, Native, and Black communities in the US became increasingly visible to me at these sites. It made me want to learn more about them and about the stories of the people who had lived on the land where I was collecting the soil. For example, I want to know more about the history of Roar, where there is a sign with photos of Black farmers cultivating the land and then being moved off of it before the prison was built. I also want to know more about the racially segregated division of labor and housing at Limonera and at Seabrook. I want to know more about the Colorado River Indian Reservation, on top of which Poston was built despite the tribal council's protests. And I look forward to Densho's panel next week, Japanese American Incarceration on Indigenous Lands. So we don't know the full history, but it seems it seems clear that there are different ways in which people have been separated from each other and pitted against each other in displacement, a colonial project that creates barriers to building solidarity.
And as Japanese Americans, understanding the ways in which our systems have been designed to really separate us from other communities of color is a really vital and important step so that we can continue to heal our relationships, to build solidarity, and organize to take these systems down. The system of white supremacy that made it possible for our community to be forcibly displaced, mass incarcerated, and exploited for their agricultural labor is the same system that manifests as state-sanctioned violence against Black people, the denial of resources and sovereignty to Native people, and the detaining of children and families in immigration detention centers. We know that as a community, there are many ways in which Japanese Americans have operated from our fear and have allied ourselves with whiteness. And we must end this pattern now and boldly show up in solidarity with Black, Native, and Brown communities to ensure that history stops repeating itself. So we really want to end our talk by uplifting the incredible work of groups like Japanese Americans for Justice, Nikkei Resistors, and Suru for Solidarity, who are actively working to build unity between Japanese Americans and other communities of color to develop strategies to fight against immigrant detention and anti-Black racism. The image on this slide is from an action that was organized by Suru at the Tanforan Assembly Center in San Francisco, which had been a racetrack that was converted into a holding place for displaced Japanese Americans before they were sent to more permanent incarceration camps. It's now a mall. And this action was part of the Suru Rising events earlier this month. During the action, Japanese American prison camp survivors led a memorial service for George Floyd and other Black folks who have been murdered by police, in addition to honoring those who have died in ICE detention centers and honoring those who died in World War II prison camps. We're really thrilled to see the ways our Nikkei community is using their stories and power to show up in the movement for racial justice. And we really look forward to exploring how we might support these movements and actions through our creative work as Round Rock Collective. So thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you very much. Great. I've got we don't have a whole lot of time, but a couple questions to ask you that, fortunately, your talk answered a lot of my questions. But a couple of them struck me was, what was the attitude like, or how did your interviewees feel when you asked them to make these pinch pots? I think that for a lot of Nisei, they're used to being asked questions about their experiences, but never to actually make something while they're actually doing it.
Mickey, you want to take this question?
Okay. I actually just checked in with Sophie and Andra about this to kind of hear what they thought people's reactions were. Because it seemed like a lot to ask, to hold, this part of their history, literally. And we were talking about it, and it seemed like, well, we asked them after the interviews. So they had answered the questions already. So it didn't really detract from that, I think. But I think we all felt like they were just really focused on making a good pot. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it felt exciting. Like most of the interviewees felt excited to be like working with clay and doing this like very tactile task and also perfecting it. So I definitely don't think that the significance was lost. I think that, they obviously recognized, one, that we had, Miki had collected all of these different soil samples and had brought them all, and that they could work with them and revisit that history that way.
Okay. And one last question about that process. Were they designed to be temporary? Were they designed to be like as a keepsake, or just as a process, or more designed to be a keepsake that they would take with them after this?
Oh, Well, we actually made two. So we still have the pots for the installation. We're hoping to show it again. But I also made them each a pot with soil from the places that they were held. So they have their own pots too.
Okay.
But they were fired to like 2,400 degrees, so they'll hopefully last a long time. Yeah, and I'll be able to hang on to them.
Okay. I mean, one thing that struck me, and it wasn't evident maybe in the work itself when I looked at it, but hearing you talk about your activism and about a big part seemed to be about your respect for the indigenous sites and the people, and there are so many parallels that have gone through different people of color in this country, and I was wondering how. Does the activism drive your art? Does your art drive your activism? Is it something that goes hand in hand? And obviously, there's three views, so each one might have a different answer. But I'd like you to talk about that.
Sophie, you can start. Sure. Yeah, I feel like as an artist, I bring my activism into everything that I do. It's kind of hard to turn that off. And at the same time, I think going into this project, there's also just like a lot that I didn't know. There's a lot of history that I didn't know. So I didn't necessarily like enter the project thinking that it would cover like a specific political struggle. But it was, just like as we dug deeper into the history and learned a lot more, it just became so clear the connections between what happened to our community and our people, what has happened to so many different groups throughout time, and what is currently happening now. And there's so many great organizing groups that are also making those connections, I think, more and more. So it's kind of exciting to see like how what we found and explored is becoming, or is, part of the narrative that a lot of these activist organizations are putting out into the world as well.
Yeah, and I also want to know, I appreciate, John, that, you said maybe it wasn't immediately evident just on seeing the work before our presentation. And I think it was really important to us. We really just wanted the work to be a presentation of the interviews that we did and let folks, tell their own story and reflect on it without, putting our message on it or something like that. So that was pretty intentional. Though it's clear that we come to this work with, our own history and our own experience and kind of intention in how we want to, continue moving through the world, knowing this history. And just that it feels, I would say also, in my own work, at least, that like there's so many, for us, there's like so many gaps, for example, in our own family history, and being able to move through these archives and to also collect new archives, to do these interviews, to kind of like fill in different things that get lost because of the dispersal of family and things like that. And so it does feel like a form of activism to make, this information and knowledge more accessible to people, readily available.
Yeah. Okay, Miki, anything?
Well, I don't know that I have anything to add. I know for me personally, my work is very utilitarian on a day-to-day basis, at least my pottery. And so this is a way for me to work with my family on these subjects that, I that are really important to me, and be able to, to make something together, and to kind of push myself in a different direction, which was really amazing.
Oh, great. Okay, so we have a question from Dwight Dunstan, and he wants to know what's next for the Round Rock Collective.
What's next, you all?
Well, I know Miki, you want to talk about this? Or I guess maybe you don't know what I'm suggesting, but basically, so since we first showed keeping in San Francisco last spring, or spring of 2019, Miki has since visited all of the incarceration camps and
Not quite.
okay, and also some of the Department of Justice sites as well, and collected soil from there. So it would be a hope to sometime be able to show this again. Also show it on the East Coast since we haven't been able to do it here, but includes pots made from the soil from those sites too.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, so which camps haven't you gone to yet?
I haven't been to Gila River because I didn't plan ahead far enough, and I didn't get permission.
You get the permission, yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of rolled into Roar right at sunset, and I was confused about where Jerome was.
Okay.
So I didn't make it to Jerome.
Okay. Well, that'd be fun. I was fortunate that in 1990 I went to all 10 sites.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
yeah, it's great. So the other two, you don't travel with her on these things?
I have a more flexible schedule over the past year and a half.
Okay.
But we did visit some of them together. Just she went to many more than we did.
Okay. So are you also going to do more interviews then too with more people, or is it more about the converting this project more into less of the interview and more of the ceramics part or the object part of it? Don't know yet?
We would definitely be open to talking to more people, if not to, even record them in an interview just to be able to connect with more folks. That was really a pleasure to get to know some of the people who lived and worked at Seabrook, and some of them still live there. But yeah, we haven't talked about that part yet, but nothing's out of the question, I don't think.
Okay, so this is a call out to everybody watching. Get a hold of them if you want to be part of this, or if you know somebody who can actually have a good story for them. It'd be great to, I think that's one thing I love about the pilgrimages. You get to meet people you normally wouldn't have ever had the opportunity to meet, and the connections are amazing. So it'd be great to take advantage of that. So we're actually a little bit over, so I'll probably have to conclude this now. But first, I want to thank you three for your project, for coming on and working with us. I just was so maybe because of my mom's background with Salinas and Poston, and having them talk about that connection, and to just see their faces and see their hands making those vessels. And I just thought it was just such a moving part of an interview that really was a new thing for me, not to just hear and see interview, but to actually see a different kind of reaction. And so thank you very much. So next week, I'll be talking to Shane Sato about his project on Nikkei veterans. So if you get a chance, head on over to the Tadaima Fine Art Gallery to check out his work, and we'll see you here next week. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.